All right, I believe we have Senator Rohrabaugh with us this morning. Senator, is that you?
You're most welcome. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Senator. Let me just turn down this music behind us because we have another guest on later, Noah Liss, who is just an outstanding singer. But we are honored to have you on the program, Senator. Good morning.
I am not an outstanding singer, Dan, and so I will spare your listeners good morning. It's nice to be with you.
Always an honor. Can you believe, Andrew, 1 month from today, the primary takes place? That's not much time.
No, 30 days and counting, and we're certainly going to be working around the clock from now until 8 o'clock on August 14th, and that's after August 14th is when the real fun begins, Dan, because I am hoping that I will have the opportunity to run against Chris Donovan. I'll run against any Democrat, but Chris Donovan is a particularly appealing opponent at the moment.
Why is he appealing?
Well, he's appealing because our records are so very different in Hartford. Chris Donovan has been a cheerleader for the largest tax increase this state has ever endured, and I was the leading Republican standing up against it on the Finance Committee, where I'm the leading Senate Republican on the Finance Committee. Chris Donovan has thought that business is the enemy. He's always thought that business is a place to tax and find money to fund government, and I've always thought that we should get out of the way of business to allow them to create more jobs and to build our economy. So I just think that voters would have a very clear choice if they were looking at Chris Donovan's record and my record.
There's also the sentiment, and perhaps you can expand on this, that if Donovan wins the primary on August the 14th, he's also appealing to the Republican winner because of the investigation that's hanging over his campaign. What do you say to that?
Well, I've said the same thing since that news broke, which is there's no good answer for Chris Donovan, Dan. If he knew about what was going on, that makes him unfit to be a member of Congress. If he didn't know about what was going on, it speaks volumes to the way in which he's conducting his campaign. If he can't pay attention to the details of his campaign, what kind of focus do you think he's going to give to being our member of Congress? And I think people want a member of Congress who is paying attention, on the ball, and who is willing to accept responsibility for what happens in his office.
You have staked out issues throughout the campaign, and I thought perhaps we would staked out positions on issues. I thought we'd go over some of them, beginning
Sure.
with your position on taxes. You have laid out an interesting plan, such as lowering the corporate tax rate. Talk about that.
Well, Dan, in the past 4 years, 35 countries around the globe have lowered their corporate tax rates. The last time the United States of America lowered their corporate tax rate was 1988. So companies are choosing to move their operations overseas to take advantage of the lower tax rates. Apple dodged more than $2 billion in taxes by moving their operations overseas. So in my view, if the United States of America wants to remain competitive in a global economy, we have to make our corporate tax rates competitive. And we need, now more than ever, what this country needs is job creation. And the only way we're going to create jobs in this country is by giving businesses confidence that we want to support them. Right now, businesses feel overregulated, overtaxed, and underappreciated. And in my view, the best way to give confidence to business that we want to work with them to grow this economy is to reduce the corporate tax rate and say, please invest in new plant and equipment, hire new people. The federal government wants to be a partner with you to make this country stronger.
You also support lowering the income tax rates.
Well, the reality is, Dan, that for middle-class families, the federal government is taking an even greater share of every dollar they earn. So in my view, we need, the way to grow tax revenues is to have more taxpayers, not to raise taxes. And the way we're going to have more taxpayers is if we let business grow, then we'll have more people working. With more people working, we don't need to have such a high income tax rate. And I think that everyone, particularly given Now, I'm running for Congress. I've seen what the state of Connecticut has done to people. There's less, and our municipalities. Property taxes are rising. State taxes are rising. The federal government needs to offer some relief to taxpayers who are struggling more than ever to make ends meet.
You would also support eliminating the death tax and the AMT tax, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the death tax, Dan, is something that is a real, I don't think that it's fair to people that work all their lives to build up a family business or a family farm, and for the imposition of the death tax to require people to sell things in order to pay the tax. If somebody has a family business that's worth $2 million or $4 million that they've worked hard all their life to build, when the father or the mother, whoever owns the business, dies, for a family to have to sell the business because they need to pay a death tax, to me, is profoundly un-American. And I'm just, every dollar that somebody has already been taxed somewhere along the way. It was taxed as income or as a capital gain. And so for us to tax people for the privilege of dying, I've never thought that was the right thing to do.
Yesterday, at the National Governors Association gathering in Williamsburg, Virginia, Governor Malloy said Republicans who oppose Obamacare, suggested Republicans who oppose Obamacare essentially are unpatriotic. You oppose Obamacare. Are you unpatriotic?
No, I'm not unpatriotic. And, my response to Governor Malloy would be, I think the better question is, a governor who put on his bond commission agenda a $300,000 grant to the People's Center in New Haven, an organization which houses the official Communist Party newspaper for the state of Connecticut. I think that smacks a lot more of being unpatriotic than those of us who think that an ever-growing federal government that threatens to occupy every part of our lives is a threat to what made America great. I don't think Republicans are unpatriotic for questioning Obamacare and for believing there's a better way to address the health care problem. And so I think people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Now, the argument among the Democrats is that the Republicans have not offered a cogent alternative to Obamacare. What would you do to help reform health care?
Well, my opinion, Dan, is that the federal government is ill-equipped to take on this responsibility. The programs that they now run are in very serious financial jeopardy. The Social Security and Medicare are both facing tremendous financial challenges. So for the federal government to say, we're going to take on yet another big program, I think it's too much to expect that they would be able to do that in a way that is responsible. So the answer that I have, I think each of the 50 states should be charged with coming up with a program to deal with this crisis. It should be a market-based solution. We shouldn't throw out the system that's working for 80 or 85% of the people in this country. For the 15 to 20% of people who don't have insurance or who are underinsured, the states need to develop creative ways to make sure that we are using our healthcare resources wisely. I mean, right now, people end up in the emergency room. It is a lot more costly to treat people when they haven't taken care of themselves than to make sure there's a place where people can have their routine healthcare needs tended to.
Well, Senator, speaking of the states, here in Connecticut, as you know, the governor has not dismissed the possibility that under the health insurance exchanges, which must be set up under Obamacare, that we could have the state getting involved with its own insurance plan, such as the Sustanet. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think that the state of Connecticut is whistling Dixie or fiddling while our state burns. Connecticut is one of the, I think our pension fund was rated the third worst funded pension fund. We have liabilities out there, Dan, that are going to really pose very big challenges for us, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. So I think that the state of Connecticut needs to address the healthcare challenge that we have as a state, but I don't think we address it by buying a Cadillac. We can't afford a Cadillac. I think this is the time when we have to be very careful with how we spend our money and offer something more modest than what the governor has in mind.
Now, you've staked out some position on education, and I'm sure you've seen the recent stories emerging about questionable test scores, or at least some doubts about test scores in 2010. Perhaps they were inflated. How do we handle what is a very complex problem in this country, and for that matter in this state, education?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, Dan, the way we're going to handle education is by having parents and teachers and administrators in the community looking at best practices from throughout the country and making a commitment to replicate them in every school we have. I don't think that the federal government, we have a federal Department of Education, and I'm not convinced that what we pay for that department is worth it in terms of the benefit that it offers to schools in the 5th District in Connecticut. I will credit. I disagree with President Obama on virtually everything, but his Education Secretary Arne Duncan has been willing to shake things up a little bit and has told states that they should stop with settling for mediocrity. And this Race for the Top program, Secretary Duncan said, you're not going to get federal money for education if you come up with a mediocre plan that's the product of consensus. And in Connecticut, the bill that we passed to try to get that money, when they brought the bill out on the Senate floor, Senator Gaffney said, this bill is the product of consensus. And guess what? We failed in the competition for Race to the Top money because we weren't willing to take the kind of bold steps that need to be taken to improve our schools.
What's your take on the effort by the governor to try and reform education in Connecticut?
Well, I think the governor mishandled an opportunity to implement some important reforms, because the governor, in my judgment, the governor's approach of being out of the box, adversarial, and kind of calling people names wasn't constructive to winning over the stakeholders in the process. Everybody recognizes that serious reforms are needed, but I think the way you build public support for those reforms and the way you build support from people within the system is by speaking intelligently with them and not by getting into name-calling and kind of shouting matches. And I think the governor set the tone for that debate, and I don't think he did our state any favors by making it so adversarial.